The day Ayanna Red Feather asked for scraps, every man in the last lantern learned what kind of hunger frightened him most. It was not the hunger in her face, though that was plain enough. It was not the dust on her dress, nor the cracked line at her lower lip, nor the way her fingers held the doorframe, as if the whole room might tilt and throw her back into the street. It was the fact that she asked softly, without shame, and still made them feel accused. The noon sun lay hard across Dust Hollow, turning the windows white and the street outside into a river of pale dirt. Inside the eating house, the air smelled of coffee, beef stew, hot cornbread, and men who had ridden too long in the heat. Forks moved. Chairs creaked. A spoon touched a bowl once, then stopped. Ayanna stood just past the threshold, an Apache woman alone in a town that had already decided what she was before she opened her mouth. Around her wrist was a faded blue scarf, tied careful and tight, its edges worn thin from years of weather and travel. She kept that hand close to her side, not hidden, protected. Behind the counter, Caleb Whitaker was lifting a pan of biscuits from the oven, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, flour dusting the brown hair at his temple. He was 41 years old, broad in the shoulders, quiet in the eyes, and known in Dust Hollow as a man who could cook a meal without saying 10 words from sunrise to sundown. He heard the door open. He heard the room change. Then he heard her voice. "Could I have the scraps?" Nobody answered at first. The question hung there above the tables, smaller than a prayer and heavier than a judge's hand. A cattle broker near the stove gave a low laugh into his cup. Another man looked down at his plate, suddenly interested in beans. Silus Crow, sitting at the center table in a black vest too fine for the dust around him, leaned back and smiled like he had been waiting all week for something decent to hate. "Scraps?" he said. "Back doors for scraps." A few men chuckled because it was safer than silence. Ayanna did not move. Her eyes stayed on the floorboards, not beaten down, just measuring the cost of every breath. "Anything left?" she said. "Bread heels. Bone broth. I can pay later." Silas tapped his knife against his plate. "Best ask the dogs first. They got senior claim behind this place." This time the laugh came louder. It rolled across the room and struck the walls and died there. Caleb set the pan down. The sound was soft, but every head turned. He wiped his hands on a clean towel, stepped from behind the counter, and looked at Ayanna the way a man looks at weather he cannot stop but can still choose how to stand in. He did not ask where she came from. He did not ask what tribe. He did not ask what trouble followed her. He walked to the best table in the room, the one beneath the front window, and pulled out a chair. "Sit down, ma'am," he said. The room went still enough to hear the stove breathe. Ayanna lifted her eyes, uncertain for the first time. Caleb turned to the shelf, took down a white cloth, and spread it across the table with both hands. Then he placed a cup there, clean and upright. "No woman eats scraps in my house." Caleb did not hurry, and that made the room more restless than if he had shouted. He moved like a man setting a fence post in hard ground, one motion at a time, each one meant to last. First came a bowl of beef stew, thick with potatoes and carrots, steam lifting from it in slow white ribbons. Then came cornbread split open and shining with butter, a plate of beans, 2 slices of apple pie saved from breakfast, and a tin cup filled with clean water drawn fresh from the barrel. He set down a fork, a spoon, and a folded napkin beside her hand as if she had ridden in wearing silk instead of dust. Ayanna stared at the food without touching it. Hunger had brought her through the door, but pride held her still. She looked at the plates, then at Caleb, then at the men watching from every corner. "Mister," she said carefully, "I asked for what was left." Caleb rested one hand on the back of the empty chair. "This is what is left of decency," he said. "I am serving it while I still have some." The words did not come loud. They did not need to. Silus Crow's smile thinned. Martha Bell, the widow who helped Caleb wash dishes and sweep floors, stood near the stove with one hand pressed against her apron. She had seen hungry folks before. Miners with no wages. Children sent in with pennies. Widows pretending coffee was supper. But she had never seen a whole room so offended by a woman being given a chair. Ayanna lowered herself slowly, not trusting the kindness yet. The chair creaked beneath her, and that small sound seemed to break something invisible. Men shifted in their seats. A boot scraped the floor. Somebody muttered that Dust Hollow was changing for the worse. Caleb ignored all of it. He poured coffee into a second cup and set it near the stew. "Careful," he said. It is hot. Those 3 plain words struck Ayanna harder than the laughter had. Nobody had warned her gently in a long while. She picked up the spoon with fingers that trembled once before she steadied them. The first taste of stew made her close her eyes. Not long, just a breath. Long enough for Martha Bell to look away out of respect. Outside, a mule brayed near the hitching rail. The sun pressed against the glass. Dust moved in the light like tiny ghosts. Ayanna ate slowly, forcing herself not to look desperate, though every part of her body wanted to. Caleb saw it. He also saw the way she kept glancing at the food as if measuring how much could be carried. Not for later comfort. For someone waiting. Silus saw it too, but drew a meaner lesson. Looks like she plans to empty your pantry, Whitaker, he said. You feed one. You feed the whole ridge by supper. Caleb folded the towel and laid it over his arm. Then I had better make more. Ayanna's spoon paused above the bowl. For the first time, she looked straight at him. Her eyes were dark, tired, and proud enough to hurt. I did not come to shame you, she said. No, Caleb answered. That work was done before you stepped in. Ayanna finished half the bowl before Caleb understood the shape of her hunger. It was not moving toward fullness. It was moving toward a plan. She ate the way a traveler counts miles, careful with each spoonful, leaving enough behind to matter. When Martha Bell came near with more cornbread, Ayanna touched the edge of the plate but did not take it. Please, she said, almost too quiet for the room to hear. May I wrap some? Martha's face softened before she could stop it. She looked toward Caleb. Caleb was already reaching for brown paper and clean twine from beneath the counter. Wrap what you need, he said. Ayanna's shoulders tightened at that word. Need. Not want. Not steal. Need. She placed 2 pieces of corn bread into the paper, then 1 potato from the stew, then stopped herself as if an invisible hand had closed around her wrist. Martha saw the fight in her face. There is more in the pot, the widow said. No shame in carrying supper to somebody else. Ayanna looked up then, and the room seemed to lean closer without meaning to. My brother, she said. He is 12. His name is Tahu. He is waiting in the rocks north of town. Caleb's eyes moved to the window, toward the red ridge 7 miles out where the land rose broken and dry. He hurt. Ayanna shook her head once. Fever. 2 days. He tried to walk this morning and could not stand long. No one laughed now. Even the men who wanted to keep their mouths shut because sickness had a way of entering a room with its hat in its hand and making every soul remember somebody. Ayanna folded the paper with more care than the meal itself. I did not come for a feast, she said. I thought scraps would be allowed. Scraps do not anger people as much. Caleb stood behind the chair, still as a fence post. That is a hard lesson for anyone to learn. It is an old one, she answered. Silus Crow gave a dry little sound from his table. That ridge has plenty of rabbits. Apache folks know how to live off the land, do they not? Ayanna did not turn to him. Her fingers worked the twine, pulling it tight, then tighter. The soldiers drove game west. Traders blocked flour. Men with papers say the spring is not ours now. Silus stopped tapping his knife. Only for a second. Caleb noticed. So did Martha. The blue scarf around Ayanna's wrist slipped loose as she tied the bundle, showing a faded stitch near the edge. 2 letters, worked in pale thread. Caleb saw them from across the table and felt something in his chest go quiet. E.W. The same letters had been carved on the cedar chest at the foot of his mother's bed. Eleanor Whitaker. His mother had worn blue scarves in every story she ever told about the winter she almost did not survive. Caleb stepped closer, but not too close. Where did you get that cloth? He asked. Ayanna covered it with her other hand, not in fear, but in protection. My mother gave it to me. Her voice changed when she said mother. Softer, deeper. She said it belonged to a woman she found in the snow before I was born. The stove popped. A horse outside shook its harness. Caleb looked at the worn blue cloth as if it were a ghost that had walked into his eating house and sat down hungry. Then he turned, took the largest flour sack he had, and began filling it with bread, beans, dried apples, coffee, and a jar of broth sealed warm. Silus rose halfway from his chair. Whitaker. Caleb did not look at him. Sit down, Crow. Ayanna watched the sack grow heavy. I cannot pay for that. Caleb tied it shut and set it gently beside her wrapped meal. Some debts were paid before either of us knew our names. Silus Crow stood all the way up then, and the chair legs scraped the floor with a sound like a warning. Men who had been pretending not to listen stopped pretending. Martha Bell went still beside the stove. Ayanna's hand closed around the flour sack Caleb had filled, but she did not lift it. She knew that sound in a room. The sound of a kind thing being turned into an offense. Silus buttoned his black vest, as if preparing to address a court instead of an eating house. "You are making a mistake, Whitaker," he said. "A public one." Caleb tied a second knot in the twine around the sack. "Food is public now. When it feeds people working against this town, it is." Silus let his eyes move over the room, gathering agreement from men too afraid of losing credit to look away. He owned paper on half their farms, held notes on their cattle, and kept flour locked in his warehouse by the rail spur. In Dust Hollow, a man could dislike Silus Crow, but he still had to buy from him by Monday. "That ridge north of here," Silus continued, "has caused enough trouble. Freight wagons delayed. Surveyors turned back. Springs sitting and used while decent families haul water 6 miles in barrels." Ayanna's face tightened, but she kept her voice low. "The spring is not in used. Our children drink there." "Your children," Silus said, almost smiling, "are not on the county map." The room cooled around those words. Even the stove seemed to burn quieter. Caleb looked at him then, and the calm in his face had changed. Not louder, not sharper, just deeper, like a well after sundown. "Maps do not make water," he said. Silus took a step forward. "No, deeds do. Titles do. Courts do. And men who respect order do." He pointed toward the sack. "That woman carries food to the same people standing between this town and prosperity. You help her today, tomorrow there will be 50 more at your door." Caleb reached for another strip of paper and wrapped the apple pie Martha had placed on the counter. "Then tomorrow I will need more plates." A few men looked down, ashamed of almost smiling. Silus noticed, and his voice hardened. "I supply your flour." Caleb laid the pie on top of the sack. "I know. Your coffee. I know. Your salt pork, your beans, your lamp oil, your sugar when you can afford it." Caleb folded the sack closed. "You keep a fine inventory of another man's hunger." That did it. Silas's face lost its polished ease. He turned toward the room. "Hear me clear. Anyone doing trade with the last lantern after tonight can settle their debts with me before sunrise. No extensions. No favors." The threat landed where he aimed it. Shoulders sank. Eyes shifted. Dust Hollow had many brave opinions until money was mentioned. Ayanna rose slowly, pulling the heavy sack against her hip. "I will go," she said. "I did not come to bring your house trouble." Caleb stepped between her and the door, not blocking her, only sharing the weight of the moment. "Trouble was sitting here when you arrived." Outside, the afternoon wind dragged dust along the boards. Beyond the glass, 2 of Silas's riders sat mounted near the hitching rail, hats low, watching the front door without shame. Caleb saw them. Ayanna saw them too. Her fingers moved to the blue scarf at her wrist. Silus smiled again, small and cold. "Roads can be uncertain after dark." Caleb reached beneath the counter, not for a weapon, but for his old brass lantern. He struck a match, touched flame to wick, and held the light between them. "Then she will not walk in the dark alone." Caleb did not saddle in haste. Haste made men careless, and careless men gave fear something to hold. He packed the food across his old bay mare, tied the brass lantern to the saddle horn, and walked beside Ayanna as the last light drained from Dust Hollow. The town watched them leave from behind curtains and door cracks. Nobody wished them safe travel. Nobody told Silus Crow to call off the riders waiting near the rail. That was the way of Dust Hollow. Men there often knew right from wrong, but knowing had never cost as much as saying. Ayanna moved with the sack against her side, refusing Caleb's offer to carry it until the weight nearly pulled her shoulder down. Only then did she let him take the flour sack and hang it from the saddle. "You have done enough," she said. Caleb adjusted the knot. Enough is a word folks use when they want to stop before the hard part. The road north turned from wagon ruts to open ground, then from open ground to broken red stone. 7 miles did not sound far in daylight. At night, under a thin moon and a sky crowded with cold stars, 7 miles could feel like crossing the whole sorrowful edge of the world. The lantern swung softly, throwing gold over sagebrush, horsehide, and the pale dust lifting around their boots. For a while, only the wind spoke. Then Ayanna said, "Your town will punish you." Caleb looked ahead. It has been trying for years. She studied him in the lantern glow. Because of us. Because I do not clap when the wrong man makes a speech. That almost brought a smile to her face. Almost. Behind them, faint and steady, came the sound of hooves. Not close. Not hidden well either. Ayanna stopped. Caleb did not turn at once. He listened. 2 horses, maybe 3, keeping distance behind the wash. Men who wanted to be seen just enough to frighten, not enough to be named. Crow's men, Ayanna said. Caleb lifted the lantern higher, letting its light spread across the trail. Most likely, they want the food. Maybe, they want the scarf. At that, Caleb did turn his head slightly. Ayanna held her wrist close against her body. The blue cloth looked almost black in the night. Why would they want it, he asked. She took a long breath, and for the first time since leaving town, fear touched her voice. My mother said a secret can live inside a small thing. She said some men hate what proves they were wrong. Caleb let those words settle. Ahead, the trail narrowed between 2 shelves of stone where the wind whistled low and dry. He knew that cut. It bent sharply, then opened toward the north ridge. A man riding fast through it would lose sight of what waited beyond the turn. Caleb untied the lantern from the saddle horn and handed the reins to Ayanna. Keep walking. What will you do? Make the dark look bigger than it is. He stepped off the trail and climbed a flat rock above the bend, moving slow, careful, quiet. When the riders came nearer, he lifted the lantern high and swung it once toward the stone wall, then again toward the brush, making one light appear like several moving through the pass. Shadows leapt long and strange. The horses behind them slowed hard, confused by the dancing glow across rock and scrub. One rider cursed. Another called out that there were people ahead. Caleb said nothing. He only moved the lantern again, patient as a church bell. The riders turned back before reaching the bend, their hoofbeats fading into the wide dark they had trusted too much. Ayanna waited below, staring up at him as if he had done something impossible. Caleb climbed down, brushed dust from his sleeve, and took the mare's reins. No bullets, he said. No shouting. Sometimes a little light is enough. They reached the rocks north of town near midnight. In a shallow hollow beneath a leaning cedar, Tahu Red Feather lay wrapped in a worn blanket, his face damp with fever, his eyes half open but searching. Ayanna dropped beside him and spoke in Apache, soft as rain that had not yet fallen. Caleb warmed the broth over a small fire and watched the boy take 3 careful spoonfuls. After the 4th, Tahu's breathing eased. Ayanna bowed her head over the bowl, and in the firelight Caleb saw the blue scarf clearly, the pale letters stitched at its edge. E.W. The night suddenly felt older than memory. Caleb did not ask for the scarf again until Tahu had finished the broth and fallen into a calmer sleep. The boy lay beneath the leaning cedar with one hand curled around a piece of cornbread, too tired to eat it, too hungry to let it go. Ayanna sat beside him, brushing damp hair from his forehead with the back of her fingers. The fire had burned low. Beyond its small orange circle, the ridge country stretched quiet and watchful, full of stone, sage, and old paths no town map had ever learned to respect. Caleb crouched near the coals, turning the empty broth jar between his hands. The letters on the scarf stayed with him. E.W., pale thread, uneven at the bottom of the W, where his mother's hand used to slip when winter stiffened her fingers. He remembered being a boy at her bedside, listening to the same story every December when snow touched the high country. Eleanor Whitaker had been young then, expecting a child, lost 3 days in a white storm after her wagon team broke loose south of the pass. Men from town had searched one morning and quit by dark, but an Apache woman had found her by a frozen creek, carried her to shelter, fed her warm broth, and wrapped her wrists in blue cloth so she would stop shaking. His mother always said she owed 2 lives to that woman, her own, and the son who came crying into the world 6 weeks later. Caleb looked at Ayanna's wrist. My mother's name was Eleanor Whitaker, he said. The sound of it changed Ayanna's face. Not much, just enough. Her hand stilled on Tahu's brow. Eleanor, she repeated, careful with the name. My mother spoke that name when the wind turned cold. Caleb felt the night draw nearer. What was your mother called? Sansire, Ayanna said. Morning Star. Caleb lowered his eyes. He knew that name too. His mother had spoken it like a hymn. Not often. Only when the house was quiet and memory had the courage to enter. Ayanna slowly untied the scarf from her wrist. Without it, her hand looked bare, almost unguarded. She held the cloth between them, but did not offer it fully. My mother said the white woman tried to give payment. A ring, a silver comb, even her wedding shawl. My mother took only this, because it had touched the place where the woman's pulse was still fighting. Caleb swallowed hard. The fire popped once, sending a small spark into the dark. She was carrying me, he said. Ayanna looked at him then, and the old distance between them shifted under its own weight. Then my mother fed you first, she said softly. No one spoke for a while. Tahu breathed in sleep. The mare cropped dry grass near the rocks. Somewhere far below, Dust Hollow sat with its lamps burning and its conscience shut tight. Caleb reached into his coat and drew out a small leather wallet, cracked from years of sweat and weather. From inside, he took a folded paper, soft at the seams. It was the only page he had kept from his mother's Bible after the fever took her. On it, in faded pencil, she had written 2 names. Eleanor Whitaker, Sanciere of the Red Feather People. Beneath them, 1 line. Mercy is a debt the honest never finish paying. Ayanna read the words by firelight, her eyes moving slowly because the letters were not the letters of her first language, but the meaning found her anyway. She touched the edge of the paper with 1 finger. Silus Crow knows about this, she said. Caleb looked up. How? He came to our camp weeks ago with papers. He said the spring belonged to him. My father refused. Then Crow saw this scarf on my mother's lodge pole. He asked where it came from. She would not tell him. Ayanna tied the scarf back around her wrist, tighter than before. If people know our families helped each other, his story becomes weaker. Caleb folded the paper and put it away. Then by morning, he said, we will give him more truth than he can carry. Morning came without softness. It rose red over the north ridge, spreading thin light across the stones where Tahu slept easier and Ayanna stood watching the valley below. Caleb had not slept much. He had sat with his back against the cedar, his mother's folded paper in his coat, the brass lantern cold beside his boot, and the feeling that the world had turned in the night without making a sound. Before sunrise, riders appeared along the ridge. Not Crow's men. These moved in a wide, calm line, horses stepping sure over broken ground, blankets folded behind saddles, baskets tied with cord, bundles of herbs wrapped in hide. At their center rode an older Apache man with silver in his hair and a face cut deep by weather, sorrow, and command. Ayanna lifted her hand. My father, she said. Chief Nantan Red Feather dismounted before the others stopped. He did not rush to his daughter, because a chief did not run before watching the ground. But his eyes went first to Tahu beneath the cedar, then to the empty broth jar, then to Caleb. He spoke to Ayanna in Apache, low and quick. She answered with the blue scarf raised in 1 hand and Caleb's name in the other language. Nantan looked at Caleb for a long time. Then he placed his palm against his own chest and bowed his head once. The man who fed my daughter fed my blood, he said in careful English. Caleb took off his hat. Your daughter walked 7 miles for her brother. I only filled a sack. Nantan's eyes moved toward the valley, where Dust Hollow lay small and pale beneath the morning haze. Small things show the shape of large men. The Apache riders formed behind him, not as a war party, but as witnesses. More came over the rise until the ridge seemed to grow people from the earth itself. 100, then more. Men, women, elders, young riders, all quiet. No shouting, no raised rifles, only presence. They carried corn, dried meat, medicine roots, woven blankets, and 2 led horses loaded with sacks of flour Silus Crow had claimed no Apache hand would ever touch again. Caleb understood then that they were not coming down to ask permission. They were coming down to be seen. By mid-morning, Dust Hollow heard them before it saw them. Hooves on hardpan, leather creaking, the dull music of many horses moving slow. Curtains lifted along Main Street. Doors opened an inch. Sheriff Amos Greer stepped from his office with his hat crooked and his face pale from breakfast whiskey and bad conscience. Silus Crow stood outside his warehouse, already dressed, already angry, already afraid of what silence might mean when it arrived in numbers. Caleb rode beside Ayanna at the front, with Tahu wrapped in a blanket on the mare behind them, awake now, thin but watching. Chief Nantan rode on Ayanna's other side, straight-backed beneath the rising sun. When they reached the last lantern, no Apache crossed the boardwalk until Nantan dismounted and set one basket of corn at Caleb's door. Then another elder placed herbs beside it. Then a woman laid a folded blanket over the rail. Gift after gift, all in silence. Silus forced a laugh that fooled no one. "Sheriff, you going to let them surround our town?" Caleb stepped down from the saddle and looked at the same table by the front window where Ayanna had sat the day before. "They are not surrounding it," he said. "They are showing it what a thank you looks like when it has more courage than an apology." Silus Crow wanted the sheriff to reach for iron, but Sheriff Amos Greer only stood there with his thumbs hooked in his belt and his eyes moving from one quiet Apache face to another. There was no charge to answer, no window broken, no threat spoken, just baskets at a door, blankets on a rail, and a town forced to look at generosity it had not earned. That was what made Silus tremble behind his polished buttons. Not fear of danger, fear of being measured. "This is unlawful gathering," he said, loud enough for the boardwalks. "This is intimidation." Chief Nantan turned toward him with the patience of a mountain watching a fly. "We bring food," he said. "We bring medicine. We bring thanks." Silus pointed toward the ridge. "You bring numbers." Ayanna stepped forward then, the blue scarf bright against her wrist in the morning light. "So did you," she said. "But yours came on paper." A murmur passed through Dust Hollow. Caleb saw Silas's jaw tighten. He had known men like Crow all his life. They did not mind being hated. They did mind being understood. Ayanna reached into the saddlebag and drew out a flat oilskin packet. She held it carefully, not like a weapon, but like something rescued from weather. "Your riders dropped this in the dark," she said. "Maybe they meant to keep it safe for you." Silus went pale in a way anger could not hide. Sheriff Greer looked at the packet, then at Crow. "What is that?" "Private business," Silus snapped. Caleb stepped beside Ayanna. "Then read it privately in front of everybody." Nobody laughed. The sheriff took the packet with the slow hands of a man afraid paper might bite. Inside were copies of deeds, survey notes, water claims, and letters bearing Silus Crow's own mark. One page said the North Spring had been abandoned. Another claimed no families lived within 12 miles of it. A third carried the names of 3 witnesses, 2 of whom had been dead since winter. Sheriff Greer read the first line aloud, then stopped. The street leaned in. "Keep going." Martha Bell called from the last lantern doorway, her apron twisted in both hands. Greer swallowed and read more. With every sentence, Silus Crow grew smaller without moving an inch. The spring was not empty. The land was not unused. The signatures were not honest. The town heard it all in the plain morning air, with Apache families standing silent on one side and hungry townsfolk standing ashamed on the other. Silus tried one last time to lift his voice above the truth. "Those papers are misunderstood." Caleb looked at him. "Most lies are, once they get read slow." Chief Nantan did not demand punishment. Ayanna did not ask for revenge. Tahu sat wrapped in his blanket on the mare, watching the man who had tried to turn water into property and kindness into crime. The sheriff folded the papers with trembling care. "Mr. Crow," he said, "until the county judge sees these, that warehouse is closed for inspection, and no claim on the North Spring moves another inch." It was not a grand sentence. No gavel struck. No crowd cheered. But men began stepping away from Silus, one by one, as if his shadow had become something they no longer wished to stand in. The cattle broker removed his hat. A farmer who owed Crow money looked at the ground, then crossed the street to stand nearer Caleb's door. Martha carried out a bucket of water and set cups beside it. She filled the first and handed it to Ayanna. Ayanna drank, then passed the cup to Caleb. Caleb drank, then handed it to Chief Nantan. And Dust Hollow, dry-throated and watching, learned that justice could move through a town as quietly as water, finding every low place, filling it, and leaving the proudest stones exposed. Weeks passed before Dust Hollow learned how to speak of that morning without lowering its voice. Silus Crow's warehouse opened again under county seal, but no man tipped his hat to him the way they used to. His fine black vest still crossed the boardwalk, his boots still shone, his name still sat on ledgers, but something had been taken from him that no judge could restore. The town had seen him clearly. After that, even his shadow seemed to walk alone. The last lantern changed slower, then all at once. First came a farmer with 2 sacks of beans and no explanation. Then a miner left a crate of apples by the back door before sunrise. Then Martha Bell nailed a small sign beside the entrance, hand-painted in blue letters. Any hungry soul may sit. Caleb did not ask who had approved it. He only brought out another table from the storeroom and sanded the rough edges smooth. The table by the front window stayed where it was. Clean cloth, 2 chairs, morning light. On the wall above it, Caleb hung the blue scarf in a plain wooden frame. Not as a trophy, not as proof that he had been right. As a reminder that Mercy had traveled farther than any wagon road and arrived wearing dust. Ayanna came often after that, sometimes with Tahu, sometimes with baskets from her people, sometimes alone at sunset when the whole town looked softer and less certain of itself. Tahu grew stronger by the week. He learned to sweep Caleb's porch in exchange for biscuits, though Caleb always gave him 3 before the broom was even lifted. Chief Nantan brought herbs for Martha's aching hands. Martha taught 2 Apache girls how to bake pie crust without burning the edges. No speeches were made about peace. No treaty was nailed to the door. The work was smaller than that, and therefore harder to break. One evening, when the air smelled of rain but the sky had not yet opened, Ayanna stepped into the last lantern carrying a covered pot wrapped in cloth. The room looked up, not in fear now, but recognition. She walked to the front table and set the pot down before Caleb. "My mother's soup," she said. "For your house." Caleb removed his hat though he was indoors already, an old habit when something holy entered a room without asking to be called holy. He lifted the lid. Steam rose with the scent of corn, sage, broth, and mountain smoke. For a moment, the years folded together. Eleanor Whitaker lost in snow. Sansire bending over a fire. A hungry woman at a door. A town learning the cost of a chair. Caleb ladled the first bowl and placed it before Ayanna. She did not touch it right away. She looked at the framed scarf, then at the table, then at the men who had once laughed and now waited quietly for their turn. "You kept the cloth," she said. Caleb nodded. "It kept me first." Outside, rain finally began, soft on the roof, darkening the dust of Main Street. Nobody moved to close the door. They listened to it fall. Ayanna took the first spoonful, then pushed the bowl gently toward Caleb. He ate from it, then passed it to Martha, and Martha passed it to Tahu. Around that table, the meal moved hand to hand until no one could say where giving ended and receiving began. Years later, folks would argue about what truly changed Dust Hollow. Some said it was the papers. Some said it was the Apache riders on the ridge. Some said it was Silus Crow being read aloud in the street. But the old people knew better. It began when a woman expected to be handed what nobody wanted, and one quiet cowboy pulled out a chair instead. Out here, justice did not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it came as bread on a plate, water in a clean cup, and a